Hello everyone, today we are going to be looking at the new major content patch for Hades. This will be patch number 15, it dropped 2 days ago, and I will be scrolling the full list of the patch notes so you can pause that and look at it at your own leisure. For right now I just want to talk about some major points that I ran into during my playtime, talk about some of it and what I thought worked and what didn't work. So to start us off, we are going to talk about the new Wrath skills. These are essentially just an ultimate that they added to the game. During a room's combat, you build up your Wrath meter, and then at a certain point you can use them. One major complaint that I ran into with the Wrath skills is that Wrath doesn't hold from room to room. So you can't use it a lot of the times during moments that you would want to specifically save your life because it was lost when you came into the room. Another major complaint that I had with these was there seems to be no real thought given to what the Wrath does versus how much it costs. One really big example of this for me is Aphrodite's, where you fire a projectile off that charms an enemy. It essentially does nothing else, and that costs the same as everyone else's, that all are duration based for an AoE or block everything coming into you. So hers feels like an absolute waste if you see it early. I never felt like when I saw it early that I wanted to take it. So what I would like to see them do is take hers, Athena's, those are the main two defensive ones that I saw, and reduce them to about 25% Wrath cost so that you can activate them more often. Essentially giving you a benefit to picking a purely defensive Wrath skill. Ares and Poseidon's were the two that I picked the most often when I saw them. Both of theirs seem fairly well balanced, make you immune to damage, they deal pretty good AoE damage, and give you some good mobility. So they're very versatile, and I feel like 50% because they deal damage is a good cost for them. Zeus's was the only one that I found that used 100% of your bar. I don't know that it was worth that. I only used it once. I didn't particularly like it compared to Ares or Poseidon's. I never took Dionysus's one, and I never saw Artemis's Wrath. Hers just never showed up. Next thing I want to talk about is the duo skills. I did probably in the ballpark of 40 runs between the 12th and the 14th, and I only saw one duo skill. I don't know if that was just unbelievably bad luck on my part, but I saw them only that once, took it, and died the next room. So I didn't really get to use it too much, but from the one that I did use, it seemed like a cool idea. I feel like they definitely need to increase the amount of time you see them, and the major change to that I would offer up to them would be any time that you have a Trial of the Gods room where you have two conflicting gods, is the god that you don't pick always gets a duo skill. The next thing I would like to touch up on is some of the new room layouts and the new mini bosses. This felt like a really nice change of pace. The major new layout that I saw was in the dual bloodless bomber room, which it's nice to have a new layout for that room. And the two new bosses, the new bomber and the new bloodless wave spawner, are both really fun bosses. They offer a nice change of mechanic. Neither I felt were too difficult overall, but it did offer a nice variety to those mini boss rooms. We also saw the addition of a new NPC called Thanatos, who will appear randomly and have you do a kill speed room with him, where you're essentially just competing with him to see who can kill the most enemies. We've seen this type of thing in a lot of games. Here is particularly fun and annoying. He has a lot of attacks that are just mass AoE kill anything, and early on it's not too much of an issue, but especially when you get into the Apostle Fields and some of the more irritating enemies up there, it can be a real struggle to deal with his rooms if you didn't scale really hard early. It would be really nice to see them try and match rooms that you can do with him, so that you're not getting rooms that are just full of shield monsters or high armored monsters or jumpy monsters that you just can't kill before he gets a killing blow, because he just insta kills whatever he affects eventually. Along with Thanatos, we got 2 new bosses in the forms of the 2 new Fury sisters, Alicito and Tisiphon. I'm not really sure how to pronounce either of those, but they are new takes on the Megara fight, and I really like these 2 bosses. They share a lot of the visual cues that Meg had, but they change it up in a way that it feels like a fresh fight. And I think that's important to be able to do. It keeps it to where it's not just a complete overwhelming experience with these 2 new bosses, because you recognize the attacks, so you kind of know what you're dodging, but they feel fundamentally different, so it doesn't feel like it's just a rehash of the same fight. And the 2 new sisters feel vastly different from each other. And I feel like it's really hard to get that balancing act down when introducing new bosses, and I think they absolutely nailed it here. I'm really proud that they were able to get this dynamic of these 3 sisters who all share a similar fight style but feel completely different. They absolutely blew it out of the park with these 2. I think there is some tweaking that needs to be done with their specific mechanics to make them feel a little bit more fair sometime. One actually already went through today. Tisiphone got a reduced DK rate on her rage, which I thought was severely needed. So it's good that they already addressed that. I haven't fought her since that, but it'll be nice to see how that plays out in the future. We got some more boon buffs and nerfs, one of which finally came through, which I've been saying that they needed to do for a while. I'm really glad that we finally see, is Curse of Agony from Ares finally got a nerf. It's been a long time coming. I still think it's a little too strong, but it's nice to see it finally be addressed. It now takes longer for it to deal the extra damage afterwards, so that's good to see. It makes it a bit more fair on the enemies, and they have more time to respawn after getting hit, which is important. They buffed Chaos, which is nice. Chaos, once they get Chaos to a balanced state, will be the most fun boon for anything in the game, because people thrive off of risk-reward situations, and he encapsulates that so well. It's just really important that you get the risk to a point where it doesn't kill the need for the reward. One specifically that I took that actually felt like it did this really well was a really big speed nerf for a huge damage nerf, or for a huge damage upgrade rather, later. And that gives me a great hope, because that felt amazing once it went away, and I got really strong afterwards. So I think he's in a good spot right now. They just need to tweak it a little bit more to make sure all of them feel that way, and not just the damage upgrade ones feel that. Poseidon got some knockback distances rescaled, which is good. Breaking Wave deals AoE damage now instead of stuns, which is nice. Zeus got a buff. Some of these I don't necessarily agree with, but for the most part I think all the boons were well done. We saw some weapon nerfs and buffs. Some of them I agree with, some of them I don't. Shield of Chaos is easier to block with, which is good. Stygian Blade is more reliable to fight with normally instead of just spamming it special, which is important, because I felt like that one was way too special spammy. Is one of the main reasons why I don't use that weapon, so I might start using Stygian Blade again. The Adamant Rail got, I think, a very important one, in that you can actually move now while reloading, which is so important, and that I cannot believe it wasn't baseline on this weapon when it was released. But I'm glad that we're finally seeing it. It's kind of shocking that it took this long to get that, but you know, you take the punches that you're given, right? The one that I don't necessarily agree with is the Heart-Seeking Bow nerf. they reduced the projectile hitbox so it's harder to hit, and it was already on some fights, specifically the Hydra, was already really hard to tell where that hitbox was for that weapon. And I don't feel like that was a well-advised nerf. I think the better change would have been to have reduced the hitbox size of the projectiles to make them harder to hit, instead of nerfing the projectile hitbox from your bow. So I would like to see them reintroduce the old hitbox for the bow and reduce the hitbox of enemy projectiles. That way you're not doubling down on a problem that the bow already has for enemies, because Respective in this game has never really worked, and this is just going to make that worse. So we'll see how it feels over time, but with the one, I did one run with the bow and I hated it. It felt terrible. We'll see if my opinion on that changes over time with this change. Once I learn the new hitbox, like I said, I would have much rather seen them reduce the enemy projectiles hitbox instead of the bow's hitbox. So with Thanatos, we got a new trinket called the Pierce Butterfly. I really like this trinket. It facilitates safer gameplay. At the same time, it also facilitates kind of cheesier gameplay if you're not quite as good as the game. I have to cheese a lot of rooms to actually get the benefits of it. I don't necessarily know that it's worth using over something like Skull Earrings if you're somewhat bad at playing, because if you're staying in that low health pool range, you might as well just be getting the damage, and you're not going to be getting the 1% every time, every room. But if you're good at not getting hit, the Pierce Butterfly is a really nice way to reward people for not getting hit in encounters throughout the game. So I actually really enjoy that trinket overall. The Hydra fight got a new head, which I was, despite reading in the patch note, was completely unprepared for when I actually got to that fight, and it completely obliterated me. It just sends out waves. And it's fun. I like that they added a new head. I hope we see some more Hydra changes in the future. I still wish we could see a hitbox change on him, because that fight is still one of the most frustrating things ever from a standpoint of I'm trying to hit you and for some reason my attacks just don't land. Especially projectile attacks. I don't really have that problem with the melee weapon sets. Like, especially with the bow and the rail, I feel like the hitbox is just so wonky on that enemy. That could just be me being bad, but again, I feel like that needs to be facilitated somewhat. So all in all, I really enjoy the route that they keep going with this game. I think the content that they add every major update is absolutely fantastic. I don't necessarily think that I've ever had a bad takeaway from one of these. This was probably the weakest for me, specifically because I was really excited about the duo skills, and you just don't see them enough, or at least in my play session, I didn't see them nearly enough for them to be a viably interesting part of the game. The wrath skills needed rework in terms of cost per use, depending on what style of wrath skill it is. So for me, really the biggest takeaway here was the two new bosses, Thanatos, and the new mini bosses, because it's really nice to have that mix up. It makes the Meg fight not nearly as tedious to get to every time. And Thanatos is just kind of a fresh extra thing to do in rooms that isn't the stay alive room. I enjoy their new stuff. Hopefully in the coming weeks, we have like 50 days before the next major content update. So hopefully in that time we'll see some of these numbers tweaked in a positive direction. But for the most part, my takeaway is I had a lot of fun with this, and they offer enough new freshness to each of these encounters that I was beyond happy with it as a whole. Thank you all for stopping by. You'll have a wonderful, wonderful evening. Peace.